Welcome to NACD BoardVision, where leading boardroom advisors, governance professionals, and seasoned directors discuss critical issues related to your responsibilities in the boardroom.
Welcome to NACD BoardVision. I'm Peter Gleason, Managing Director and CFO of the National Association of Corporate Directors. I'm joined again today by Catherine Bromelo, Partner in PwC's Center for Board Governance. Welcome back, Catherine.
Thanks, Peter. I'm happy to be here.
Today, Catherine and I will be discussing an issue some have categorized as a sleeper in the DoddFrank Act. That is the matter known as conflict minerals. Essentially, companies are going to have to provide more disclosure if they use certain minerals commonly mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or the DRC, and its neighboring countries. The SEC proposed the related rules in December 2010, and the comment period has now ended. But the final rules aren't out yet. When the final rule does come out, Catherine, I think you'll agree with me that these rules could have a tremendous impact on a large number of companies in the U.S.
Yes, Peter. It will impact many companies, particularly manufacturing companies, and then of those, particularly the manufacturing companies in the electronics and telecom and automotive, industrial products, aerospace, and jewelry industries. It obviously also has a pretty big impact on mining companies who operate in that area. But somewhat less evidently, it impacts the retailers who contract out the manufacturing of their house brands. And in fact, this provision may affect between 5,000 and 6,000 U.S.-based companies, just depending on how they operate their supply chains.
The DoddFrank Act specifies 4 minerals as conflict minerals, including gold and the components of commonly used materials like tungsten and tin. And there's a possibility that other minerals could be added to the list by the Secretary of State. The new law intends to shine a light via public disclosure on companies that use minerals from the DRC or its neighboring countries in their products, with the hopes that this increased transparency will motivate companies to find new mineral sources. The idea is to stop indirectly funding the rebel groups associated with conflicts and extreme violence in that region. So it's obvious this sleeper provision not only impacts a number of companies, but also a number of products in their supply chain.
This is going to mean a great deal of work for companies. Companies are going to have to disclose every year if they use any of these conflict minerals in any of their products. They're going to have to make that disclosure whether they manufacture the products themselves or have other companies manufacture on their behalf. And if they do use the conflict minerals, they're going to have to make that disclosure publicly available on their website. And then if, when they trace it back, the conflict minerals originated in one of the so-called DRC countries, the company is going to have to submit a report to the SEC that describes how the company exercised the due diligence on the source of the minerals, as well as their chain of custody from the very source to where they were ultimately used.
There's obviously a lot of complexity to this issue and a lot of potential work companies will have to do to comply once the rule gets finalized. The National Association of Manufacturers estimates that it will cost the manufacturing sector up to $16 billion to implement the rule, since there are no mechanisms or systems in place in the DRC and the surrounding countries to enable affected companies to meet SEC requirements. Sourcing transparency programs take time to develop and implement, and there's no current infrastructure to trace the point of origin of minerals.
Peter, it's also important to note that the final rules aren't out yet, but they are probably expected before the end of 2011. So I guess what we'd recommend is first management should be on the outlook for the final rules because they'll provide the final definition of what companies are going to have to do. But I think at this point, probably the best advice for companies is to first identify whether they use the conflict minerals in any of their products. And if they do, they should probably try to get a better understanding of the full supply chain and whether any of those minerals come from the Democratic Republic of the Congo or other neighboring countries in Africa. If so, companies are going to have to really think about the reputational risk and the potential impact on their company and really figure out if it really makes sense potentially to look for alternate sources for those materials.
It seems a bit unrealistic to assume that large publicly held companies have their supply chains defined to the point of knowing all supplies and all products and all points of origin. Do you expect many companies will be surprised by their need to comply as they look more deeply into the supply chains?
Yes, we really do expect that this is going to be one kind of the provision or one provision of Dodd-Frank that is going to catch a number of companies by surprise. A few weeks ago I was at one of our events and I was talking with a CFO who is a CFO for a national retail chain. And they have, when they started looking into this, they have one product that really is relatively low volume for their company and low profit margin. But one element of this this product actually does include conflict minerals. And it's not even manufactured by the company, it's manufactured by a contract supplier to the company. So when they started looking into it, they realized that they were inadvertently going to be pulled into this. The real, I guess, message is that this is going to hit more companies than might suspect it right now. So if I was a director, what I would want is to have an understanding of how management is looking into this and just how much it may have an impact on our company.
Dodd-Frank also mentions an audit requirement for conflict mineral activity reporting. What can you tell directors about that?
Well, Peter, actually, there's very little clarity on what such an audit might cover or how auditors could report on such issues as supply chains. So that's one that when the final rules come out, we'll have to see what they say and then figure it out from there.
Catherine, thanks for talking with me today, and I'm sure we'll revisit this topic when we get some more definition on the rules from the SEC in the near future. That wraps up another episode of NACD's BoardVision. On behalf of PwC and the National Association of Corporate Directors, I'm Peter Gleason, and thanks for joining us.